Andy White has been scrutinizing these ancient beads. With powerful magnification, he can tell just how they were made, and he can reproduce prehistoric bead-making techniques.
If I were to give you a piece of soapstone or a piece of mammoth ivory, and I were to ask you to put a hole in it, I know exactly how you'd do it. You'd drill a hole in it, you'd turn it, you'd rotate it to make a hole. But you know what? That's part of our culture, believe it or not. That's the way we've learned how to do things. Early modern human people had a completely different technique for making holes. They did it as I'm doing. They actually dug a hole into a piece of material at a very early stage of production, and it leaves some pretty ugly traces. But because the process is one by which you grind and you polish afterwards, they were able to remove all of those ugly traces and to leave behind the tiniest of little openings. I've got a hole. A very, very, very tiny little hole that I've opened up using a very, very large point. It's actually a very emotional experience to be sitting here having finished a bead using exactly the same techniques that people did 35,000 years ago, with exactly the same raw materials that people used 35,000 years ago, in exactly the same form, in exactly the same place. We have from this rock shelter more than 1,000 beads like this. We know that someone who was mentally, emotionally, very much like ourselves, sat somewhere in this vicinity 35,000 years ago and made exactly what I've just made for you. People have tended to look at beads and suggest people were just sort of playing around. But in fact, we know that here at Castelmerle, they were spending thousands of hours making beads when they could have been doing other things that we might think to be more productive.
Beads are artifacts of the mind's Big Bang. They are evidence of our creative and cultural beginnings, recalling a time when bands of humans began interacting socially with one another.
Expression in materials is really one of the hallmarks of the revolution, if you will. This is something really new on the horizon. This is people creating social identities that don't exist in nature. This is saying, I am a Cro-Magnon woman. I've given birth. I have a particular history. I have a particular status within my group, and anyone who's a member of that group will be able to see that at a glance by the fact that she's wearing certain kinds of animal teeth, certain kinds of beads. Her clothing is decorated in certain ways. It's a mode of visual expression, but it's expressing social relationships. And I think that's something clearly that's very new in human evolution.
Humans using technology in the service of social identity. This was momentous. The birth of the human mind occurred in Africa and left its mark as far away as Australia. But the evidence is most abundant in Europe. It was here that these humans encountered another species of hominid, a species almost identical to them, but not quite. And it was this subtle difference that influenced who survived. We call these ancient Europeans Neanderthals. Compared to us, they were massive.
Meeting face-to-face a Neanderthal would be quite an impressive experience. They had a very large body mass, some 200 pounds of muscles and bones for a male. The face is very projected forward in its middle part, with almost no cheeks and a receding chin and forehead. And in the middle of this face, there was probably a huge and projecting nose.
Neanderthals and humans were different in the ways they lived, and most remarkably, in the ways they died.
The burial of La Ferracie shows the body of a male Neanderthal lying on one side in a pit, and that's all. And so far, we have very few evidence of Neanderthal burials with any kind of complex construction or organization. Neanderthals do not display many signs of symbolic life. In fact, we don't know any kind of art or symbols or pictures used by Neanderthals.
In contrast, modern humans appear to have treated their dead with extreme care. In the permafrost of Russia, this man was found buried in clothing embroidered with thousands of delicately wrought beads. Does this suggest that modern humans considered life more precious? Could it be that even though human brains were about the same size as Neanderthals, they had dramatically different abilities? The evidence is controversial. So scientists like John Shea of the State University of New York are reenacting the activities of both species to understand how their minds might have differed.
The Neanderthal point's big and heavy, and the nature of its heavy handle means that it could not have been thrown very far. In fact, it was probably not thrown at all. It was probably a stabbing weapon, used more or less like a modern bayonet. That means that in order to kill an animal, the Neanderthals had to get up really close and stab this thing into a big, dangerous creature, putting their lives at risk.
And if a Neanderthal spear ever was thrown, its range was limited.
20, 21, 22, 23, 23 meters thrown with a Neanderthal-type wooden spear. The modern human weapon, on the other hand, this piece of antler here, is very narrow, cone-shaped, like a bullet. It's attached to a very narrow handle. And this suggests it was probably thrown from a great distance. Making the antler point takes hours and hours and hours. You have to soak the antler until it's just right and then carve it by abrading it against a piece of sandstone, something more or less like this. You know, it takes a tremendous amount of patience to impose will, to impose design on this antler. It takes no great amount of time to impose one's will on stone. Stone's a very, very easy material to shape. The Neanderthal point could have been made in a matter of minutes. It's very, very simple when you know how to chip stone the correct way. Quick and dirty is the name of the game for Neanderthal technology. The next thing you want to do is see this ridge here, the way the ridge sticks up? Hold this up like I showed you, and then with your hammerstone, hit right there, pawn, and you'll undercut this whole mass and flatten the thing out. What I'm doing in teaching stone technology here is I'm trying to recreate the evolutionary environment. This is probably the way modern humans transfer these skills, is an older individual sitting around with younger individuals. You can share information. Neanderthals, we don't have any evidence of systematic teaching. It's probably something, they reinvented the wheel a lot. Beyond 50,000 years back in earlier antiquity, it's the same thing over and over and over again. That tells you there's not a lot of information being transferred, probably just imitation. But after 50,000, when the modern humans show up on the scene, every generation there's something new.
Not simply to duplicate old technology, but to build on the experience, knowledge, and wisdom of elders. This, for modern humans, was a vital strategic advantage. Now, technology could improve from one generation to the next. With this new invention, the spear thrower, a weapon could be launched even greater distances, reducing the hunter's risk.
Neanderthals, 24 meters. .42 meters. Advantage, modern humans.
Improved technology suggests a great deal about a human's emerging ability to transmit information over great distances across time.
These pictures are a way to communicate with someone else without this person being here. It can be at a far distance, or it can be in a far future. And this is what apparently Neanderthals did not do.
Fossils tell us Neanderthals lived in small, often isolated pockets, largely cut off from other Neanderthals.
For some reasons, when they could not survive longer in this spot, they would just move away. The picture we have of the upper Paleolithic modern humans in Europe is quite different.
For modern humans, portable art may have served as a means of communication. some of it traveling hundreds of miles from where it had been created.
It's very clear that these people were involved in nets of exchanges at long distance. They belong to a big entity, a big cultural entity, and it's very likely that Neanderthals did not have this at all.
Perhaps the most compelling evidence of early culture is concealed deep beneath the earth. While we may not know exactly why humans painted in these caves, we now can guess how they painted. Archaeologist Michel Lorne-Blanchet has studied the techniques of cave art. He thinks some of the images were rendered by a process he calls spit painting.
Spit painting must have had very important symbolic significance.
Through experimentation, he has been able to reproduce the technique of early artists. By mixing pigment with saliva, he believes they achieved a bonding compound that lasted long after the creators were gone.
It's not at all like painting on canvas. It's quite different. The cave is full of shape, natural shapes. The cave is extremely, is exceptional, is beautiful.
And what might renderings of wild goats and sheep painted in these eerie caverns tell us of the mind's Big Bang?
This is the first manifestation of human imagination. Modern men tend to make their imprint on the landscape, on the territory. So it's why they penetrated in the deepest part of the earth. It's like to express themselves, to say that we are the owner of the earth in some way, and we have some relationship, personal relationship, with the spirit living inside the earth.
In other corners of these caves, Lorne-Blanchet has found artifacts made of bone and a pattern of wear on the rock that led him to speculate these cave explorers also made music.
I have the feeling to be in a cathedral here, a big cathedral, an important cathedral.
So, below and above ground, our ancestors were refining technology and art and communicating in complex ways. It appears as if these changes occurred rapidly. How could it have happened?
My own view is that there was a brain change, that there was a genetic change that promoted the fully modern human brain, that allowed the kind of innovation and invention, the ability to innovate and invent that is a characteristic of modern humans. If you accept the idea that there was a neurological change 50,000 years ago and that this was rooted in biology, it would just become the latest, the most recent in a long series of mutations on which natural selection operated to produce the human species as we understand it today.
It's very likely that the changes in the brain didn't happen overnight. There wasn't one magical mutation that miraculously allowed us to speak and to walk upright and to cooperate with one another and to figure out how the world works. Evolution doesn't work that way. It would be staggeringly improbable for one mutation to do all of that. Chances are there were lots and lots of mutations over a span of tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of years that fine-tuned and sculpted the brain to give it all the magnificent powers that it has today. The actual organization of behavior goes on at the level of the individual nerve cells and their connections. We have 100 billion nerve cells, probably 100 trillion connections. It's just mind-boggling to think of all the different ways in which they are arranged. And a lot of our evolution consisted not just in getting more of this stuff, but in wiring it in precise ways to support intelligence.
So it may not have been the size